the mainstream media is a system. It's run by people who are rich and powerful and think they know what they're doing. I'm going to take that system and I'm going to screw with it. And I'm going to make them cover a story that isn't a story. I'm going to make them think something's true that isn't true. And it's almost a sort of, there's a devilish kind of impish spirit to it, which is like, you guys think you know what you're doing. You're the old school entrenched powers and you run the media. Well, we're going to take you down a peg or two. So again, it's that there is a kicking against authority, not just from a technical point of view, but from a sort of media and ideas point of view.
Hello and welcome to Digital Mindfulness, the show that brings you leading insights on the responsible and ethical technology landscapes, both in society and in business. I'm your host, Lawrence Ampofo. That was our guest today, Geoff White. As an investigative journalist, Geoff has covered technology for BBC News, Channel 4 News, Audible, Forbes, and many, many others. He's written and presented 2 major podcast series for Audible, Artificial Intelligence, Friend or Foe, and The Dark Web, as well as his own podcast series, Cybercrime Investigations. In this episode, we talk about Geoff's new book, Crime.com, and in particular, the changing nature of modern-day cybercrime. If this discussion is interesting to you, then please come to our site for a deeper dive into our research and events on the latest in responsible technology, digital ethics, and much, much more. Enjoy this episode with Geoff White. Great. So, Geoff, thank you so much for joining me here on the Digital Mindfulness Show. It's a real pleasure, particularly for me, because I'm very aware of your work. It's really a thrill to have you here, and I'm really delighted to talk about your new book that you've just released. So, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
So, Geoff, of course, I know a lot about your work, but I wonder if you just introduce yourself to the audience. Tell us a little bit about who you are, and in particular, how you came to be writing about cybercrime.
So I'm an investigative journalist, and I've covered technology for about 15 years or so, mainly for Channel 4 News, BBC News, and the Sunday Times. And mainly at Channel 4 News, I'd covered the hacking of a British telecoms company called TalkTalk, who are a huge UK internet provider. And I just found out so much stuff about this. And for the first time, I felt like I had everything. I felt like I had all of it, from the victims who'd lost, tens of thousands of pounds, some of them in these online scams, all the way through to the sort of hackers and scammers who'd started the thing off. And I just felt like I had the whole story from end to end. And I thought it was just fascinating. It had victims, it had villains. As far as I was concerned, it was, it was the best cybercrime story I'd had to date, and I just couldn't get anyone to print the thing. I went to magazines, I went to newspapers, nobody wanted to pick it up, and so I thought, well, sod it, I'll just put it on my own website, and so I put the whole thing on there. So look, this is everything I know about this story. And Dave Watkins at Reaction Books, a commissioner there, was reading around, wanted to find somebody who could write about cybercrime, came across that blog post and said, well, I like the way you write. I think, this is interesting stuff. I want a book on cybercrime. What do you reckon? And so I said, absolutely. And so we sort of thrashed it out from there. And that was really how I came to end up writing it. But what's interesting is you must have this, all of the things you come across in the years that don't really go anywhere or don't really stack up, that you don't really get to do anything with. The great thing about writing as a book is you can put all that in, all of the bits and the side stories and the little bits that you thought were really interesting but didn't belong anywhere. It all adds up, and when you write a book, suddenly you can make those connections. It's been a really great experience, actually.
I think that's fascinating, and it's really nice to hear an author say that the actual process of writing the book was a good one, because it seldom is. But I'm really interested to know, Geoff, Why do you think it was that people or different institutions weren't picking the story up? Because the Talk story is huge.
Yes, cybercrime is an interesting one. I'll be honest, I've sort of formed the view that cybercrime is one of these issues that people think they should know about and be interested in, but when you actually sort of confront them with it and say, right, do you really want to learn about this? They sort of go, oh, I don't know, I've got to go make the tea and do the ironing and that kind of thing. I think it's a bit like climate change is a bit the same. It's quite daunting, to get into it. And so I think there is this element of, well, yes, we know we should cover cybercrime, but sort of how do we do it? Again, what's been great about writing the book is the feedback I've had from people is that they really enjoy it. It's a compelling read. And one thing that has really helped cybersecurity is being able to tell stories from end to end to say, okay, here's where it starts. Here's the people who started it off. Here's what they did. And here were the impacts. The guys who break into power stations and switch off the lights, guys who break into, and it is mainly guys, break into banks, steal money, and spirit it away across the world. We can unpack these stories and tell them. So I hope the situation is changing. Certainly from the time I covered the Talk story, I think there is far more interest now from mainstream media in cybersecurity, particularly as now it's starting to be morph into things like election rigging, disinformation, fake news. That's feeding into it all now as well.
And I think that that is interesting because, as you mentioned, you've been covering this for the best part of 15 years now, and certainly making that link between cybercrime or hacking, as it were, because you talk a lot about the history of hacking in the book, and then connect that to things like everyday things like political behavior,
Mm-hmm.
shopping, and that perhaps that link was perhaps a little bit tenuous. So I think that's really interesting, isn't it? Just
Yeah. I mean, it's hacking is as old as well. Hacking is as old as computers, and actually, the term hacking is an old engineering term. So, if you had I don't know, an old motorbike or a car, you would hack it about a bit to try and see if you could, ease a few more cc's out of it, or few more miles per hour out of it. So, the principle of hacking is, here's a system, here's a bit of technology. Can I tinker with it and just make it work differently, work better, work how I want it to work? And obviously, as computers come along, the people who built those early computers, they were engineers, so they had that spirit of like, oh, well, I wonder if I can rewrite the code and do this. And that really was the sort of spirit of it. And what's interesting is, as technologies come under the sway of big companies, big money, and in some cases, big government, you can see hacking as a reaction, a psychological reaction to that, to say, no, screw you, buddy. This is our technology. We built it. We tinker with it. You don't get to tell us what to do. And even on both the non-criminal and the criminal hacking side, there's a strain, like a sort of a fault line, a seam that goes through that says, no, you don't get to control what we do with this. This is ours. And so hacking is seen as a sort of kicking against the system and a kind of regaining of control of something that was meant to be under the control of the techies.
and I really love the idea that hacking is historically very closely linked to autonomy and independence, and we're going to retain control over these computers, and I think that's really fascinating because you say that one of the big groups now in within the hacking community generally are the hacktivists. And would this group be taking on that mantle of, you know, sticking their flag in the sand and saying, actually, we're going to take control over these computers and use them to our own ends?
Absolutely so. There's a couple of dimensions to that. So yeah, I think within the sort of hacktivist strain, so these are people who, they're not necessarily criminal hackers, they're not necessarily out for money, although there's a crossover with, with people who are, they're not necessarily sort of professional hackers working for companies or working for governments. They're often one man bands, and again, it's generally blokes who are seen doing this. So there's that element of, yes, I'm going to tinker with this system and I'm going to show the people who claim to have authority and autonomy over this that actually they don't, and that I can subvert that. But the other thing that comes in with those hacktivist movements, particularly people like Anonymous, the guys who wear the sort of Guy Fawkes masks and so on, is this idea of mainstream media and mainstream authority being something to be kicked against. It's partly because a lot of these people are young, they tend to skew younger, and when we're young, we oppose authority. But also there's this idea that particularly mainstream media have just got it wrong, and that they're po-faced and adversarial, and that they need taking down a peg or two. Some of what these hacktivist groups have done is they're not necessarily hacking computers or software at that stage. They're almost hacking media. They're hacking media coverage. And the idea is, the mainstream media is a system. It's run by people who are rich and powerful and think they know what they're doing. I'm going to take that system and I'm going to screw with it. And I'm going to make them cover a story that isn't a story. I'm going to make them think something's true that isn't true. And it's almost a sort of, there's a devilish kind of impish spirit to it, which is like, you guys think you know what you're doing. You're the old school entrenched powers and you run the media. Well, we're going to take you down a peg or two. So again, it's that there is a kicking against authority, not just from a technical point of view, but from a sort of media and ideas point of view.
I really want, I'd love Geoff to come back to the book, the actual book itself. So I wonder if you can just tell us a little bit about, this work that you've just published now. It's called crime.com. And in particular, if you can tell us about, well, what the book is about. We've just been discussing it, but also why is it so important now?
So the idea of the book is why hacking has become so big now. Why are we facing this big threat now? And obviously part of that's to do with, we use more computers, we use more phones, yes. But in the background, there's been this coming together of three hidden hacking groups, or groups that aren't publicly well known about. So we've got the hacktivists that I talked about there, that we discussed, people who manipulate media, people who are very good at understanding how media works and hacking it, manipulating it, twisting it, using it to their own ends. You've also got organized crime, and there's a fantastic cartoon I've got of three mobsters sitting around a table, and one of them saying to the others, for health and safety reasons we're shifting our operations to cybercrime. And it's true, look, if you rob a bank with guns you might get nicked and put in prison. If you rob it remotely from 5 countries and 5 time zones away, you're probably not going to get caught, or even if you get charged you might not even get arrested. So organized crime has seen, and obviously as online banking has emerged and credit card use has boomed, they saw the opportunity. The organized crime went online. And the third group is the sort of government hackers. Government spies have always existed. Cybersecurity has just given them a whole new kind of set of tools to use. And all countries have them. Britain has them, China has them, Russia has them. Those groups were sort of fairly separate traditionally. You could sort of tell if you got hacked, is it a government, is it an organized crime gang? Over the years, and particularly over the last 5 years or so, those groups have come together. You are starting to see governments using hacktivist tactics, hacktivist tools. You're starting to see organized cybercrime using hacktivist tools and hacktivists adopting cybercrime tools. There's a merging together of these three things. And because they're quite powerful individually, as they learn from each other's tactics, not only do they get more powerful, but it gets harder to spot who's doing what. So, government attacks, one government attacking another government, they will try and disguise themselves as cyber criminals, because then you could write it off and say, oh, it's just criminals, it's not a government. So this has really created this new threat. And the reason this is really important now is, this has always been about money. Money's always been part of it. Reputational damage has always been part of it. What this is morphing into now is really dangerous and really key is obviously electoral processes, democratic processes, and we've seen a lot of that, particularly around the US presidential election in 2016, and also information and disinformation and fake news, and our ability to trust the information we get, which obviously during the coronavirus period is incredibly important. So suddenly these three groups have come together. The power has centered together, and it's happening at a time when we really need to kind of crack how we trust information and how we trust our electoral processes.
One of the things that you mentioned, Geoff, just now is this whole focus on trust, which of course has been historically and is really, really difficult to create computationally. But I think a larger thing that's more important than this really is the question of power. And I wonder if you can just talk to why this prevalence of cybercrime is so impactful, but also increasingly widely used by these asymmetric groups. Is it because it's something that you can do just from your computer screen and there's little physical impact, but you can have a great political or social impact across borders?
Yeah, it depends which group you're talking about. For the government hackers, it's definitely the case that it's cheaper. I mean, one of the things I cover in the book is North Korean government hacking. North Korea is a country that's under international financial sanctions. They do not have a lot of money to throw about, and each missile test they do costs them megabucks. Or they can recruit a whole bunch of computer hackers who are fairly cheap to hire, and they can create pandemonium around the world, as they did with the WannaCry ransomware attack, which happened in 2017. The damage of that, not necessarily financially, but just in terms of disruption, was huge. I mean, to cause that kind of disruption with traditional means, traditional weapons, risky and expensive. So definitely governments are thinking that they're going to save money. It's quicker and easier to do. Cybercrime gangs, they they put a lot of effort into this stuff. They are working, they are 9 to 5, Monday to Friday operations. What they are looking for is the minimum effort for the maximum financial return, and they want to scale as much as they can, which is again why ransomware has been really popular for them. Ransomware, you can, so the ransomware scrambles your files, you charge the victim a ransom to get the files back. You can drop that on hundreds of thousands of machines, and we've seen recently ransomware being dropped on a supplier. So as, for example, dental surgeries use a particular supplier to store all their x-rays, so they drop the ransomware on the x-ray software supplier, which means that all of the dental surgeries are affected. So instead of just one infection, one ransom, you do one infection, you get multiple ransoms. So they're using this as a sort of scalable, mass cash generating tool. But you're right. I mean, in the hacktivist area, it's definitely asymmetric warfare, and there's a sort of huge pride among some of these researchers and young hackers to say, well, I went up against the likes of TalkTalk, the likes of Sony, and I kicked them in the pants. And it's just me with my laptop. There's a sort of, I think there's a sort of compelling kind of lone wolf, psychology to that, and that can go two ways. It can go well. The company can say, well, yes, you've exposed our vulnerabilities, we'll patch them, but also, it can result in huge amounts of our data, our personal data, being hacked and leaked. So it's different motivations for those different groups, I think.
Geoff, that perspective of the lone wolf hacker, again, it's being very much mythologized, and that's when I think of a hacker, that's exactly what I think of. Someone in a hoodie just doing this type of work. Is that actually true?
In some cases, yes. In some cases, no. I mean, the one of the most interesting sort of groups really was the sort of spin-off from Anonymous called lulzsec. Which is group, its composition varied. It was really sort of 4 people at the center of that group. And what's interesting is it's quite rare you get someone who combines the mix of all the talents that you need. And so you might have somebody who's very, very good at scanning websites and finding holes in them. But when they find the hole in the website and they get access to the database, they've got no idea what to do with the database. You get somebody else who's brilliant at databases and can, manipulate SQL like a god, but they're not very good at finding the holes in the website. So often you'll find even people who work as lone wolf hackers will often reach out for support and help on a forum with a particular thing. And more often than not, it's a group of kind of hackers. My experience, anyway, is it's small groups of hackers working together. Occasionally, you get sort of lone wolves, and But the other thing is, it's for me, it's impossible to understate the influence of computer gaming on all of this. Gaming is where a lot of young hackers get their first start in hacking. They want to hack the computer game, they want to score more points, or they get hit by somebody else who's hacked the game, and they want to know how that's done so they can win their points back. And again, with these games, they're forging quick allegiances with teams of people. You play Call of Duty, you'll often team up with a few people. You don't know them from Adam, but you all team up, you have some fun, and then you go your separate ways. So there's that very quick, agile team making to achieve an objective. And again, in the hacking world, that I see that happening, where it's like, well, I know this guy's handle, I know he's good at doing a particular exploit. I'll message him and see if he wants to work with me on this. So there's a sort of agile team making that goes on, I think.
Geoff, from reading your book and listening to everything that you've just said, this really feels like the online space and the cyber criminals that exist within this. This very much seems like a new era and a new space for exerting power. Would you agree with that?
Yes, broadly speaking, yeah. Right. Look, we're in an increasingly technological society. We're increasingly connected, and in a way that I don't think any of us really fully anticipated that we would be. I mean, there was a whole shift towards commerce. There's a shift of banking online. I think what people didn't really predict was the shift of society online, which sounds very highfalutin, but I mean, I'm particularly talking about social networks. The idea that our interactions would be entirely mediated by online forces. I think even if you'd spoken to people back in 2000, 2001, as commerce was really taking off, if you'd said to them, oh well, then our social interactions now will be online, particularly during this coronavirus period, it's mad. A friend of mine made the point that all of her interactions for a period of several months were online interactions. They were going through companies, mediated by companies. I just don't think anyone could have predicted that. And that dovetails with this idea of disinformation and fake news, because it's not just about, can we hack people's money? Can we hack systems? At the point where society is interacting online, hacking becomes about changing society and changing minds and changing views. So in a way, it's sort of no surprise we've ended up really where we are.
I think we've just escalated this discussion from stealing a few pounds or a few dollars all the way up to influencing the hearts and minds of citizens and nations around the world. And I'm really interested to know how this is done exactly, because again, people online now listening to this show are probably unaware of these tactics that are used every day.
It's interesting. There was some really interesting work done around the Brexit referendum, and around online sort of information manipulation and so on. There is still obviously a lot of people who are convinced that Brexit was sort of stolen as a vote and was manipulated online. Certainly there were, it's true there was online manipulation, but the Oxford Internet Institute did some really interesting research about this, and they looked at how messages were being spread and how they were being amplified. And look, as a journalist, I love to tell a straight story, and I love to have a story I can tell ABC. And what's annoying about that is, as a journalist, you often end up being quite reductive about stuff. The problem with the whole Brexit and information manipulation generally is it's not that easy. So, for example, there was a T-shirt company that was making T-shirts, and there was something about you could order a Brexit yes or Brexit no T-shirt or something like that. And this was an entirely automated process. They had a Twitter account, and whatever was trending on Twitter, they would stick it on a T-shirt and say, hey, do you want to get a T-shirt made of this particular issue? And of course, Brexit was a particular issue, so their algorithm picked this up and started going, hey, do you want a Brexit yes or Brexit no T-shirt? Bots that were then trying to influence, so automated Twitter accounts that were trying to influence the Brexit vote, picked up on this, picked up on the T-shirts, started spreading the T-shirts. But then what was interesting was, normal people, real people, non-bot accounts started going, hey, this is T-shirt thing, and they started, which then got picked up again by the bot accounts, which got picked up by the T-shirt manufacturers. So you have this trying to tease apart those lines and say, look, that's programmatic behavior, that's manipulated behavior, or that's just genuinely people being bothered about it. And look, what sparked off the whole thing, first of all, what made the T-shirt manufacturer bot pick up on this, it's because Brexit's a big issue, and it's not a big issue because people are manipulating it to be. It's a big issue. So the problem now is sort of teasing these things apart. I think that's, and you talked about hacker tactics. It's increasingly, it's really quite difficult as a journalist to work out what hacker tactics are and to separate them out from just natural organic interest in subjects. But certainly, the tools have got much, much better at spotting issues as they're coming up and being really, really careful and stealthy about amplifying messages. And I think the bit that's difficult to spot is the amplifying of messages, but that is really, I think that's where the hacking skill is going, and where the sort of cutting edge of it is.
And I'd say that's so pernicious, isn't it?
Mm.
The amplification of messages,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
essentially computational propaganda.
Mm.
It's so pernicious, and it is difficult to spot if you are a layperson. If you're just a general person going about their lives, and you've got your phone and you just want to communicate with your friends and do your shopping and pay your taxes.
Mm. Mm.
It's very difficult to know what's true and what is not,
Mm.
especially during times when you need to be able to trust the sanctity of big messages coming through, like
Mm.
stay at home, wear
Mm.
a mask. And now, there are big groups of people that are disputing these facts. Should we wear masks or not? And where do you
Mm.
get? So I think that issue of trust is really important. And I'm wondering how, you've just described really well, just the evolution of this to where we are now. How do you see this going forward? How do you see this in the next kind of 5 years or so? Do you think it's really up to people to become more aware, to improve their digital literacy skills, or
Yeah.
can you see us maybe outsourcing that to code?
I can't see us outsourcing it to code, because it's computers are very good at doing computery things, which sounds like a really crap thing to say, but if we're going to protect ourselves and our democratic processes, these are human processes we have to protect. outsourcing it to a computer and trying to impute our values onto a computer and make a computer run the way our brains would run, I just don't think is going to work. I think the payback that we have to pay as a society for the incredible technology that we're using. I mean, the people still don't understand the basis of the internet, how it works, pains me, because when you understand the underlying kit and the tech and the infrastructure, that thing is remarkable. It is a beast. And the fact that it's held up so well during coronavirus is a testament to what we've created. It's brilliant. The money we pay, the fee we pay for that infrastructure is that we have to understand more about it, and we have to take charge of information, and in quite a granular way. It annoys me that I see people liking and sharing things that they know aren't true because they don't think it matters. They don't think, and also not even liking or sharing, but just watching a video online that they know isn't true. What they don't realize is every second of that video that you watch, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, wherever you're watching that video, they are seeing that and going, hey, they just watched another few seconds of that. This video must be good. Let's bump it up the rankings. Every time you like it, every time you share it, it doesn't matter whether you thought it was rubbish or not. The networks, the social networks, are attaching importance to it. We have to start being our own filters of ourselves. And, I've seen friends of mine, family sharing stuff that they're not sure whether it's true or not, but they just want to be helpful, so they share it. And I have to sort of say to them, don't do that. You're sort of part of the problem at that stage. So I don't think in the next 5 years we're going to sort of crack this in a sort of automated or government or regulatory way. I really think it's up to us as individuals to do this, which isn't an easy message to sell. I'd love it if we could kind of leave it to government or industry, but it ain't going to happen. I don't see the incentives or the wit there. I think it's an individual level on which we've got to do this. And I think people, I hope people are receptive to that message, because we don't want to be in a situation where we can't believe anything we read, where we don't even know whether the people who got into power legitimately. It's not a good situation to be in.
One of the key themes and stories that's just emerged over time in relation to cybercrime is the whole narrative about the dark web, and whatever that means, whatever conceptualizations people have of that. But I think the intensity of that particular story theme has decreased in recent times. And I wonder if you can just talk to us about that particular theme and just where we are at the moment with the dark web.
It has. The dark web won't go away. In a way, it can't go away because it's open source code. So anybody can download dark web software, set up a dark website. It's impossible to stamp it out. But as a criminal, as a centre for criminal enterprise, there's been a trail of destruction wrought by law enforcement on the dark web, starting with the takedown of Silk Road, the first and the granddaddy of them all, the sort of drugs marketplace, mainly drugs marketplace, and the conviction of Ross Ulbricht, the guy behind it. Then subsequently, Alphabay and Hansa were two of the biggest markets that took over from that. They again were knocked down in a law enforcement sting operation, which was remarkable, absolutely remarkable piece of law enforcement activity. And then recently we've seen Empire Market, which is one of the sort of big inheritors of those, shutting its doors. And what's interesting is, as soon as it shut its doors, people said, well, either it's been infiltrated by the police or the people who ran the site have disappeared with the money. Each time these things happen, to go back to the trust point, trust in the dark web diminishes. And people said, oh, well, you can't destroy the dark web. It's like, well, that's not the point. The point is to destroy the trust in the dark web. However, I think where the dark web is going to go is, I've seen on the marketplaces I've looked at, increasingly vendors will advertise on those dark web marketplaces, but they will do the trade will be done on an encrypted app, something like Telegram. And Telegram itself is really interesting. So you can have an open Telegram group where you tout your wares, but then Telegram has asymmetrically encrypted chat, end-to-end encrypted chat, where you can do the deal and send your Bitcoin wallet and your address and so on. And if Telegram's own publicity is to be believed, it's going to be almost impossible for law enforcement. They can look at the ads, they can see the vendors advertising, but it's going to be impossible for them to tap into the communications where the deal was actually done. So I see the dark web splintering off into a kind of shop window almost element, where the actual, you advertise your wares on the dark web maybe, but you do the deal on Telegram. And it's not unfeasible that there will be, a successor to to the dark web technology that we use, the Tor technology. There's already things like Freenet and I2P and successors. So we may also see another evolution of the dark web. But yeah, it's hard to see at the moment that the trust in dark web as a place to go and to buy illegal goods hasn't been quite badly hit by law enforcement. But its origin of the dark web is absolutely fascinating. It's well worth. It's still an object lesson to read, even though, as you say, I think the dark web may be at the moment waning.
Geoff, we've spoken a little bit about trust in this podcast and as it relates to cybercrime. And again, I'm just wondering if we can go from there and just pull backwards just a little bit more to talk about the whole idea of responsibility and maybe even ethics, because what we're seeing now, of course, and of course this is the theme of the whole podcast, but there's this burgeoning industry of responsible technology, ethical technology actors and companies that are starting to have a real big influence in these big enterprise companies or just within the technological landscape more generally. And I'm just wondering whether this movement, this is the grassroots movement that's really going to provide a bulwark against the nefarious cybercrime, that everything that we've been describing on this podcast.
It's never something I've been asked before, and it's not really something I'll be honest, I've thought of before. I mean, there are ethical concerns. I come across them all the time as a journalist. What are the ethics of doing this story? And you're right in terms of, I mean, I've done stuff on facial recognition and AI, and ethics definitely comes into that. But interestingly, it comes in as one part of the debate. There's the technology aspects of how do we do this. There's a sort of regulatory aspect of how do we police this. The sort of ethical aspects, if you like, of why should we do this? Should we do this? Tend to get dropped on as an afterthought. My worry is those debates tend to be had sort of outside the circles that are actually developing this technology and deploying it. It's a really interesting question. It also ties in with something that I've been thinking about, which I wondered about doing as a possible other book. As I've published one book. You think, oh, well, maybe I'll do another one. But this idea that increasingly in society we are held to computerized standards. So, if you look at the way computers work, they never forget anything. They can access everything instantly. The computer's opinion one day will be the same as it is the next day. They don't switch in that particular way. Computers don't respond emotionally to issues. They sort of analyze as much information as possible, and you can run different algorithms to analyze that information. Increasingly, we're sort of held to those same standards. I feel sorry sometimes for people whose tweets from 5 years ago have been hauled out and hurled at them, because 5 years ago I thought different things and I wouldn't necessarily agree with them. And it strikes me that for us at the moment to say that we're wrong or that we've changed our minds, again, it ties into the coronavirus thing. There's these U-turns on coronavirus. Yes, some of them are U-turns. Some of them are just, we've changed our mind. We were wrong. This inability to say, I was wrong or I've changed, for me, comes from a kind of mechanistic view of society that's informed by computers. It's like, well, computers aren't wrong. Computers get it right. They don't have to change their minds. Why have you? So I wonder, with the ethics, whether we're fighting that flow, and again, a lot of the work's done around algorithms and the way algorithms work. There's this sort of faith in algorithms, like they're a sort of thing that comes out of the clear blue sky, like Moses tablets, and we just, well, of course the algorithm is right and can't be wrong and can't be influenced and biased. It's like, well, no, the algorithm was written by a human being. But again, we use these algorithms and people say, oh, well, it's the computer, then the computer must get it right. Facial recognition, well, the computer's identified me as a match. We're sort of increasingly kind of being ushered into this situation where we trust computers and we're supposed to behave like them and accept their decisions as though they're almost better than us. So it's a very long answer and a woolly answer, but it's just me really thinking out loud about the issue of ethics. It's clearly something I need to think a bit more about. And I mean, on the AI front, it's really interesting. I did a series on AI for Audible, and there is this. I realized I was speaking to two different groups of people as I made the series. I was speaking to lobbyists and ethicists to a certain extent and political scientists and so on, who were saying, look, we need to understand these algorithms. We need to understand the AI. We need to understand how it reached this decision. I was then speaking to people notably one of the senior scientists at Microsoft. And I sort of said to him, look, if I gave you enough time to work out why Bing showed me a search result, would you be able to go back through the maths and say, oh, well, you clicked on this and you looked at that? And he said, well, no. I mean, maybe after hundreds of years, but look, it's the decisions Bing makes on what search results to show you is so affected by so many different things. It's like playing multi-way chess. And I realized that, I was speaking to two different people who just had two completely different views of this. And it was only when I interviewed a banker, one of the finance bods that I interviewed, who made a really good point. He said, look, we won't get to know every jot and tittle of a decision that the AI makes. But, when a doctor diagnoses you with something, you don't analyze you don't say, well, where did you go to university? Where did you go to school? Has anybody in your family had any, you can't microanalyze humans' decisions. And there may be a point where we just have to, there's a point where we can no longer interrogate the algorithm. I find that a really uncomfortable point to reach, but I suspect that's the point we'll reach where it's like, well, we've vetted the black box as much as we can, but there's a certain point where the computer, it's making its own decision. That's going to be a huge point for society, I think. But to a certain extent, we're already there, but that's where we're going.
Absolutely. So Geoff, you've just written and published crime.com. What would you say is the main message that you'd like readers to take away from the book?
Look, it's really depressing, but in 20 plus years of cybercrime development, the key tool cyber criminals use, and behind a lot of these big hacks, the 2016 presidential election, the blackouts in the Ukraine, stealing $80 million from Bangladesh Bank, the beginning point for all those stories was an email. An email arrives, it's got an attachment, it's got a link. It's depressing to know this, but if there's one thing anybody and everybody should take away from the book, it's like your inbox is the front door to a very busy street, and anybody can shove anything to the letterbox. Treat that with extreme care. And I know it's a basic lesson, and probably the people listening to your program are, well across this, but it cannot be stressed enough. And also, if you know it and know it really well, please spread it to your friends and family. It's depressing, but that lesson would probably solve 80% of cybercrime if it was absorbed around the world.
Geoff, a cautionary message, absolutely. Geoff, that was fantastic. And where can people find out more about you and your work and connect with you?
Best place is on Twitter. I'm Geoff White, Geoff with a G, White like the colour, and the number's 247, because I am Geoff White, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Wow, Geoff, I don't envy you that. Just before we do go, thanks for sharing everything today. I wonder if you can just talk to us a little bit about the stage show that you used to run and whether it's actually going to come back, or at least tell us what the thrust of that was, because this was initially how I found you years ago, and it's an absolutely fascinating premise.
It's a good point. So yeah, so this also I started doing stuff at Channel 4 News about personal data, which at the time this was 2013, 14ish, and at the time personal data was a big question. People were just confused by it. So we did a whole bunch of stories, and I was really struggling to kind of make people care about this stuff. And we were at a music festival, Latitude Music Festival we went to, and I was like, how am I going to get a bunch of hungover festival goers to be interested in this? So I thought, okay, I will hack my own phone. So we used a thing called Wireshark, which intercepts your phone's communications with the internet and your device's communications with the internet. And it's great, you literally press a button on your phone and Wireshark shows you 400 little bits of information that your phone just threw out, and you can trace it and you can map it all as where it went in the world. It's an amazing tool. So I was like, okay, let's do Wireshark Live. And despite my reservations, people just loved it. And they're like, can you do my phone? And so I realized the problem with personal data is it's not personal. When I say, millions of people's personal data has been stolen, that's deeply impersonal. It's only personal when it's your data. So what we did was we get audiences of people. We would, with their permission, we would hack their phones. We would intercept their Wi-Fi communications, and we would show them Wireshark. And we'd say, look, this is what your phones are doing. This is the secret life of your mobile phone, as we called the show. And we mapped it. We showed them how packet switching worked. We showed them, all the different networks that were receiving their information. And people just paid attention because it's them. It's their phone. It's not somebody else. It's not somebody on screen. It's not millions of people. It's them. And so it was a really important lesson of this is how you get to people. Unfortunately, you can't do it en masse, but for the, few thousands of people that we got to and we did this show for, that really mattered to them. It really cared. So it was a lesson of sort of quality over quantity, I guess. Subsequently, the vulnerability that we really used in that show has been patched, so it's a bit harder to do now. I'm interested in seeing whether we can use mobile phone, like the 4G and 5G networks, to do this. I think that might be feasible. And we've also done stuff subsequently about trying to show people how cookies work and how personal data works and so on. But it really was a wonderful experience, and it took us to some great places. I mean, suddenly we're in with kind of theatre directors and TV producers and stuff, and it took us into a whole area of life of sort of the theatre world and the performance world that we wouldn't have got into before. It was a wonderful experience, and it really, and I'm glad you enjoyed it. It got a lot of attention in the right quarters because it's a fun way of doing things. And we went to Edinburgh Festival and we sold out, so that's a win, I think.
Geoff, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been fantastic speaking to you, and all the very best with crime.com.
Thanks, I really appreciate it.